It's good to tease DeWitt. We don't tease him enough on this show.
Exactly.
Oh my God, that was ridiculous. What the hell's happening there?
All right, we go live at 5:05 and it's 5:05. Shall we go live?
Okay, I'll hit mute all. And let's see. Gotta mute everybody in case the Zoom bomber shows up. And speaker gallery and Mark. Whenever you're ready.
Welcome everybody to the 79th episode of Lit Balm. Today we have an amazing feature guest emceed by David Blair and curated. And we have Hannah Sullivan in from London, England. We have Kathleen Ossip, Julia Story, and Peter Campion. And we're absolutely delighted to have them and look forward to hearing from them. But let's get started. So first I'm going to introduce my co-host, Jonathan Penton, who founded Unlikely Stories, an electronic journal of literature and art in 1998. He's lent his editorial and management assistance to many literary and artistic ventures, such as the New Orleans Poetry Festival, Mad Hat Inc., Rigorous, and Big Bridge. In 2005, he founded Unlikely Books, which publishes 3 to 5 books of poetry a year. He's organized literary performances and performed himself across the United States. His poetry books are Last Chap, Virgin Press, Blood and Salsa and Painting Rust, Prosthetic Gods for New Sins Press, and Standards of Sanity from Litfest Press, and the free e-chapbook, Backstories, which you can download from Argotist eBooks. We'd love to hear something from you, JP.
Thank you, Mark. All right, so as the regulars have heard me say many times, I'm not terribly prolific. So what I read most weeks is a poem that we've recently published at unlikelystories.org. And this week, I'm very pleased to be reading something by Sheila E. Murphy, the great poet and highbun crafter. This is called No Gravity by Sheila E. Murphy. When he laughs, he hears the womanly inclusion of a crying sound, afraid of letting go. There is no gravity to safen him. The monster boys he wanted to touch or be are poised to show themselves. He has no guarantee of something he can count on. He agrees to laugh, reveals that he is willing to give in to what they want. He concedes points never made, the rollerblade of envy that occupies some land he might have owned. If only he could dwell unharmed and look across into their eyes equal as thought. Again, that's No Gravity by Sheila E. Murphy. And next up, very excited to introduce our co-host, Cassandra Atherton. Cassandra is an award-winning writer, scholar of prose poetry, and professor of writer and literature in Melbourne, Australia. Her most recent books of prose poetry are Pre-Raphaelite, Leftovers, and Fugitive Letters. She is currently writing a book of prose poetry on the atomic bomb with funding from the Australia Council. I've read it, it's wonderful, though when's it coming out? But yeah. Cassandra co-wrote Prose Poetry and Introduction and the Anthology of Australian Prose Poetry, and she is commissioning editor for Westerly Magazine. Cassandra, will you read something for us today?
I'd love to. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to read a piece today. I've got a friend who's sending poets in Australia images, brain scans, and asking people to write broadly about the image. So this one's called Planetary Nebula. In an Airbus's aisle seat, I slowly get drunk on whiskey, contemplating the last of things. I'm not haunted by ex-lovers, but I remember the first time you bent me backwards over the bed and enfolded my body in yours. In corner rooms of 4-star hotels, we watched the moon cycle through all its phases as points of starlight combed my hair and brushed your chest. You say we can't always live in this state of flux, as if I can turn off the heat as quickly as a Joni Mitchell song vanishes in an airport lounge. But I understand endings. I might be 650 light years away, riding the back of the Helix Nebula, but you are standing in the ultraviolet of its dying glow. And I'm going to introduce the wonderful Mark Vincennes. We all know and love his bio, so please, karaoke style, join in at apt moments. Mark Vincennes is an Anglo-Swiss American poet, a fiction writer, a translator, editor, publisher, designer, multi-genre artist, and musician. He's published 16 books of poetry, including more recently, Leaning into the Infinite, The Syndicate of Water and Light, Here Comes the Night Dust, Einstein Fledermaus, and The Little Book of Earthly Delights. Vincennes' newest collection, A Brief Conversation with Consciousness, is forthcoming this fall from the brilliant Unlikely Books. An album of music, ambience, and verse, Left Hand Clapping, is forthcoming from Tree Torn Records. Vincennes is also a prolific translator. He's translated from, yes, German, Romanian, and French. He has published 10 books of translations, most recently Unexpected Development by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist Klaus Merz, White Pine 2018, and he was he was a finalist for the 2016 Cliff Becker Book Prize in Translation. His translation of Klaus Merz's selected poems, An Audible Blue, is forthcoming from White Pine Press. Vincennes is editor and publisher of Mad Hat Press and publisher of New American Writing. He has lived all over the world, from Brazil to China to Iceland to India. He was born, in Matilda Hospital on the Peak in Hong Kong, but he now lives on a farm in rural Western Massachusetts, overlooking Herman Melville's Greylock Mountain, and where there are more muskrats, long-eared bats, and ermine than people. Mark, please read us something wonderful.
I'll do my best. This poem comes from a book I'm working on called All the Tricks of Language. Memory or recollection. Daisies in your hair, grains of sand in your toes. What an aristocratic house you come from. The Coast Guard dusted off his arm every time you passed. There's more to the story than that, of course. It goes on ad infinitum. I never wanted to speak badly of you, but you were in the dark about living, sacramental almost. It was something unrealized, like that antelope sparking off stones just outside Cape Town, or the divisive act that probably led us here in the first place. We were born to hide, not run, probably unequipped in all the machinations. Tough medicine can be hard to swallow, but the miracle is all in you. Don't stand on your pedestal of dictionaries, splay yourself across the world. I know it's possibly too much to bear, and that season of mine all wound up in its own apparitions. Somewhere in India, we crossed the border, a thin veil of nothingness. But I swear, it was there in the all seen and the less seen. Money or redemption, you said, turning over that winded myth. The answer grows not in the wind, but between the boughs. So strategic you were, even mostly present or moaning about the past in the present, all severed now, and the hoot of the screech owls outside reminds me it's time to go to bed. And well, thank you. And now I'd like to introduce you to our MC for the evening, David Blair, who lives and works around Boston. Thomas Lux chose his first book of poetry, Ascension Days, for the Del Sol Poetry Prize in 2007. His second book, Friends with Dogs, was a must-read selection for the Massachusetts Book Awards, and his third book, Arsonville, was published as part of the Green Rose Prize series by New Issues Prose and Poetry and Prose. A graduate of Fordham University and the creative writing program at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro, David has taught in the MFA program at the University of New Hampshire and in the online master's degree program in creative writing at Southern New Hampshire University. Mad Hat Press published his new collection of poetry, Barbarian Season, in 2020, and we're looking at a new collection of David's short poems coming out next year. So keep an eye out for that. David.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here. Thank you, Cassandra and Jonathan. I'm really looking for, and thank you everybody who's here to read poetry. I sort of wish I could channel Sally Connolly right now, because she has that book, Branches of Isolation, about transatlantic poetry from Mad Hat too. And part of what makes Hannah Sullivan so original and fresh is her synthesis of American and English poetry. 3 Poems is a first book, and what a book. I would hold it up so you could see the sky blue Faber and Faber cover, but alas, I left it on my bookshelf at work because my class won't be getting to it for another month now. An Oxford professor, she is with us today from London, where she lives. I would tell everybody to read 3 Poems, even if it were only a chapbook containing its first touching and funny sequence of poems about a footloose, people-blind, and privileged millennial enjoying, among other things, the trendy foods of New York. With the wonderful prose in her poems, Sullivan has a novelist's basically tolerant eye for social comedy in her work, and she has a rhetorical but far from dismissive distance from her protagonists, a version of a person she must once have been or been like, at least in part. And that is very welcome in a self-serious age. It also feels like writing as discovery, and that sense of discovery is something she celebrates no matter what. It's gutsy to start a book with such strength, but then there's the middle sequence of numbered and untitled lyrics that put me in mind of the 30s sequences of W.H. Auden, and the book's 3rd poem, which shows a poet who, like Louise Gluck in Ararat, has seen both life and death, is also amazing. I've been looking forward to hearing you read, Hannah. So thank you for being here with us this afternoon and much later in England.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is a real pleasure. It was a pleasure to get your email a few years ago where you said you're going to read 3 poems a few times. I think it was a point at which the book had already come out and I felt everyone had read it once and put it away. And thank you for such a generous description. I feel, of course, that the things I've been writing recently don't live up to any of the descriptions that you just gave. So I'm going to start by reading a poem from the beginning of a poem called Happy Birthday, which is really me, just me, and in my kitchen in Shepherd's Bush. And I think likes all glamour, all, cocktails, and possibly distance from the protagonist. But it's a poem that was intended to be a single day poem. So it's going to narrate the whole of a day, which is my 41st birthday last year. It ended up finishing at about 10 a.m. with getting into the shower. So it's a smaller poem than I planned it to be, but about the same length as the ones in 3 poems. So this is the opening. It's about midlife. The first half having been given up to space, I decided to devote my remaining life to time, this thing we live in officially or on like moss or the spores of a stubborn candida strain, only to be gored or gaffed, roots fossicked out by rake, or have our membranes made so permeable by azole drugs, the contents of the cell flood everywhere. The bubble gun I'd bought on Amazon had come, so flushed. Times new novitiate, I stood outside the door in velour slippers with a plastic wedge from M&S, the toes gone through, and practiced pulsing softly on the trigger, pushing dribbly, hopeless sack shapes out, dead embryos that managed all the same to right themselves to spheres and bob, as bubbles do, the colour of a rainbow minced or diced into the laurel bush, or else just brim the fatal fence, most out of reach of the toddler capering side to side to keep his balance on the grass, one snotty index finger poised in threat of threat until 5 seconds in, they self-unskinned and lost their radiance, re-rendered air. This would have been in that sad hobbled stretch of week between a Sunday Christmas and New Year, my friends all 40 plus, harassed by infants, joylessly still slugging back the red, the detox books not downloaded to app, but only browsed by phone in the dark mornings, slitless, dawn wet and recusant. It wasn't till my birthday, January 3rd, when schools went back, search engines saw a volume spike for custody, and gifts of sullen cats with emery boards explained the dead-eyed, unsheathed fear produced by credit card repayment plans and pissing on ketosis sticks, that the month could manifest the rawness of New Year. Poverty then, and mock exams. Now, enzyme supplements and softening the 11s scooped one layer deeper by all that red wine, by summer's oxidative damage. That is going to be the last section of my new book, which is coming out next year. The title at the moment is This Incandescence, but it's sort of wavering a little bit. The middle section of the book is actually a section of prose. So those interests I'm trying to dissever a little bit. And the first poem in the book is on a subject that I think many British poets have now addressed. To me, it has a particularly personal resonance because the site is very close to my house. The fire in the Grenfell Tower, which was four and a half years ago now. So this is a long poem with multiple speakers and to some extent a documentary poem adapted from the inquiry, which has provided a lot of evidence. People living in the building, people who worked as firefighters, as ambulance crew, engineers. So it's sort of an amalgam of different types of evidence with a narrator who is somewhat distanced from that. So I'm just going to read two sections, and then I'll read something from 3 poems. If you can think about the stenciled words above the fire-resistant cot he had just built, the yellow twinkle, twinkle, little star, do you know how loved you are? If you can think about the child whose favorite song was run, run as fast as you can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man, and see the kitchen as it was, the fridge, the saffron crumbling in the stewing fish, and then the rectangle of ash it is. If you can hear the bombs that raised the site, old women running out with not much on, it was the last year of the war, and they were tired and touched their wagging greasy braids of hair. You'll see the vacancy it always was, the eagerness with which all things disperse. To see the length and breadth and depth of hell, the water sluicing down the stairs, the hoses reaching out a hand, not hoses, soft, the fetus slowing, losing his newly acquired skills, his fingers no longer bothering to touch his new-grown hair, his mother carried out, face soot side up, his mother running large with him back up the stairs into the smoke, the cyanide, her mind, her hand the memory of her daughter's wrist, being lost, rescuing the already born, because to meditate on the efficiency of the placenta, its vascularity, the chunks of liver, the swift diffusion across the interfillous spaces, on children lost, stillborn, the word stillbirth, the man who planned to tie his daughter to his chest, step into air, flip up, go lying on his back to break her fall. And on the way that baby was delivered, the silence as they dressed him this one time, his mother's body thumping to the side, the midwife's fingers fumbling on the poppers, his mother waking up evacuated, masked. To hear the short cough, petulant, the hosepipe maid being trodden on, staccato of the skull against the stairs, the water jets, the slop of firemen wrestling down the carcass, the heaving dog. And outside, underneath a tree at dawn, the body laid out on the ground, that rattling sound. To walk into the flat where it all started and see the fridge, the square, it had no depth. It would have crumbled under water jets. To walk out of the bridgehead into dawn. Outside, this incandescence, neither green nor yellow in the gardens. June, the birds. The traffic on the Westway was still sparse and stately as the drivers rubbernecked. To say the caller's name and hold the line, to keep the caller there until the end, to walk into the almost longest day, the tinnitus of silence after sound, outside this incandescence in the gardens, the sprinklers turning in the garden squares. I'm going to read something now, I guess to finish from 3 poems. It's a long time since I read from this book. I used to go around and read from it all the time, and years pass, COVID happens, you don't do readings anymore. So I'm just going to, I think I'll just read the opening of the first poem. This is the opening of You Very Young in New York. I thought I was incredibly old when I wrote this poem, of course, but now it seems like I was pretty young. Rosie used to say that New York was a fairground. You'll know when it's time, when the fair is over, but nothing seems to happen. You stand around on the same street corners, smoking, thin-elbowed, looking down avenues in a lime green dress with one arm raised, waiting to get older. Nothing happens. You try without success the usual prescriptions, the usual essays on innocence. I love you to the wrong person. I feel depressed. Kissing a girl, a sharpener, sea urchin, juice cleansers. But the senses laxly fed are self-replenishing, fresh as the first time. So even the eventual sameness has a savor for you. Even the sting when someone flinches at I love you is not unwelcome, like the ulcer on your tongue wetted on the ridges of a tooth. And when he slams you hard against the frame, the poor-ticked, sallow bruise seems truer than the speed, the spasm with which you came. So nothing happens. No matter what you try, the huge lost innocence at which you aimed recedes, like long perspectives. Like the sky square at the end of Fifth, whitening at dawn unseen, as you watch the unlit cabs go by. All summer, the park smelled of cloves and it was dying. Now it is Labor Day and you've been sleeping through a rainstorm, half aware of the sewage and frying peanut oil and the ozone rising in the morning heat and the sound of your roommate hooking the chain, flipping ice cubes into a brandy balloon, pouring juice over them, ruby sanguinello, till they giggle, popping their skins. The freezer throbs. He's been beating a man he met on Craigslist. He's been dreaming. Old New York, a James novel, a Greenwich Village Christmas, a certain kind of frost in the meatpacking district, and the smell of the carcasses dull with the tang of freezing blood beside the skip of the Hudson wind. You've been thinking of the building opposite at night, the lights going off one by one, a diminished Mondrian, one Ochre Square, where a woman undresses for the city, stroking her puffy thighs. You hear him talking on the phone about you, his petite innocente. All summer you have been eating peaches from the green market. Overripe in September, they need to rest in the icebox, sitting with their bruises. All summer you have been dreaming of fall and its brittle confection of branches. Thank you for inviting me to read. I look forward to hearing everybody else.
What powerful poetry and what range in that book, and the next book you can see is going to be even better. I loved her second and first books so much. I wrote about Julia Story's new book, Spinster for Hire, for On the Seawall. Here's my lead. Since her first book, Post Moxie, is really an underground classic, the 3D movie of a book, news of a new Julia Story book is big news for me. Who could forget that pared down teenage world of ugly camouflage pants and invasive bamboo, her dubious mysticism, the formal innovation of her text box prose poetry shorts, or how she registered the hostility of Indiana towards girls. Spinster for Hire is her second full-length collection, a sort of sequel that shows her originality and extends her range into deeper wit and shadows, childhood, and being adult. Formally, Spinster for Hire rises to the post-Moxie goad to do something new, especially with a number of three-part narrative poems that offer scenes from distinctly different but thematically linked narrative moments, narrative odes. So there's Julie for you, writing about Indiana, a formerly inventive poet, but not in a flashy way, but in the way that serves the ends of her poems and end with their shocks of recognition. Julia's poetry is the best example of almost under the radar excellence that I know. Under the radar because we are too dazzled by the ability of a few presses to get our attention. Why not be free? The way Julia writes to be free of Indiana and toxic fundamentalism and bleakness, she will not only name but laugh about. I don't mean that everybody is a dope or anything like that. Dan Chasen chose Julie's first book for the Morton Prize, and one of the poems in Spinster for Hire won a Pushcart Prize, and she had a poem in the New Yorker. Julia is one of my good Somerville poet friends. I'm not biased, I'm in good company. She's the real thing. Thank you for being here, Julia.
Oh, thank you, David. That was probably the nicest introduction I've ever had. That was really sweet. Thank you. So I have to apologize in advance for the small white dog you might see behind me. She's been crying a little bit, so you might hear her crying a bit in the background. Hopefully she won't start barking loudly. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. And Hannah, that reading was so beautiful and so moving. But I'm really excited to be here. So thanks to everyone for coming. So I'm going to read a few poems from Spinster for Hire. I'll just preface by saying that I wrote most of the poems while living in rural Southwest England with my husband for a year. That's where he's from. So there's quite a few references to feeling American, badgers and sheep and stuff like that. This is about going to one of Thomas Hardy's houses. It seemed like there were multiple houses that Thomas Hardy lived in when we were there. Monstrous. My face, talking signpost or locked door to a ballroom in a derelict hotel. I walk alone through the woods to the house of another dead Englishman. There are families and clots of children exclaiming over a live cat in a bedroom. Then silent but shoulder to shoulder, they read about 18th century hair. For all to see, I clonk my head in a tiny doorway, exclaim in American while everyone looks away. Before there were humans, there was darkness. Dark swaying, a mist, a lake of blood, but everything was a lake of blood. And born of the blood were even creatures like me, who make mothers run from every direction, who sleep as open-hearted as the newly dead. And I guess that one was kind of for the Halloween season, actually, it's sort of dark. But here's a poem that's specifically about a horror movie. I love horror movies. It's about one of my favorite horror movies, The Ring. But the poem is called The Well. I couldn't sleep and stayed up most of the night on oxycodone, watching horror movies and placing my body into the weird contortion that turned the pain from a nail gun into a moderately smoking campfire. Then it was morning and I had to go to the basement, but I was too scared. The last time I tried, I fell down the rotting steps and landed with my cheek in a puddle, a displaced bug scurrying by my eyelash. I had stopped going to work and lived in a voice structure. Instead of walls and floors and my third floor view of roofs, every step seemed to place me on paths of braided invisible limbs as I went from bed to bathroom to hunch over the stove. I heard voices in these creatures, and before long, it was easier to stay in bed, folded into my V shape. For most of my life, I couldn't watch horror movies because I believed in real demonic possession. But now I don't mind the stupidity of horror movie people, their underwater movement, their staring and staring into indifferent caverns of nothingness. In one movie, the angry dead girl wanted the people to learn a lesson, but what they needed to learn was the worst kind of exhaustion, and they wouldn't learn it. They finally found the well under the floor, but finding it only made things worse. One ended with no eyes, while another was cursed to live this life over and over again. The Romantics. I can't see all of human experience in a bird's nest. And if I were to try to describe something as romantic, most likely what I mean is damp. Beauty is less important to me as the jagged coastline of my heart stretches out into a long, thin line. More surface area where birds can rest, where anything can rest. When I was married, I fantasized about calling the numbers on for rent signs. 1 bedroom with washer, dryer, all utilities included was a dark, magical wood. The still and empty windows, the dream of scratched blank wooden floors and appliances that were mine, mine, mine. A view through trees, through no face but mine. Now my head is filled with as many empty houses as I dream, as I creak around their closets, dangerous balconies, the dark, tragic corners of their basements. There is even one cathedral. I don't worship there, but sometimes I go inside to listen to the rain, the grass flattening on the hill, the bloodthirsty wind. I think I'll just read one more from Spencer, and then I'm going to read some newer poems. Demincula. Badger holes are everywhere, dark sarcophagi in reverse, filled with violent sleeping mammals. In a field, there's a bell, not for church, because there is no church. You can ring it if you choose, and if you are alone, you can listen to it alone. As I was reading that, I realized I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing sarcophagi correctly. Sarcophagus, it's the plural of that. Okay, so I'm going to read some new poems now. They're part of a manuscript I've been working on for a very long time. I took a big long break from it, but it's based on the 60s horror movie Carnival of Souls, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. I identify very strongly with the protagonist of that movie. So these poems, there's a section of the manuscript that's sort of like the Book of Hours by Rilke, love poems to God, but they're sort of like a Midwestern, mid-Gen X person having a midlife crisis / the protagonist of this movie. So yeah, I don't know if that helps. I don't know if it probably didn't help very much to say that, but they don't have titles, so I'll just do a brief pause between each one. The smaller I am, the easier it is for people to dream of me. I go into their heads like a seed, planting my tiny doorway, and crudely through it come these awful resurrections. They gave me a homestead by a little lake, rustling itself in the breeze. But the land rustled up 3 corpses by the end of winter. How industrious the sadness is, making its ramp into me every day, building its house and also its saw, its level, its nails, and whatever substance makes these walls. As you know, I am no one's bride, and yet I belong to you, and you are like me, a suit of armor made of mercury. The creatures lilt and gamble when they sense our hovering. I am a wraparound porch, bound to my own heart, and you an afternoon filled with street corners. My fugue state, but brittle. Pieces of me broke off, each one a little you. That night we washed our socks together in the hotel sink, then watched an old Murder, She Wrote. A blank face as white as breaths on the screen. I wept because I knew it was my face. Then together we went into the painting of the ocean. I'm sorry I told all of those Catholics they were going to hell. And I'm sorry I didn't appreciate enough the gaily colored everything that has always been running along both sides of me. And I know you want me to stop apologizing so much, But let me just say about the hallway with the portraits. I'm sorry I defaced you. I'm sorry I took the face off the very body you wanted me to be. The goats in the photo were all dead, as was the grandpa with his bowed legs and cigarette, his tall sister and their Ford. Most of the trees were dead, having burnt up with the rest of the house. And the corn was most certainly dead, digested by cows and rotated through so many miles of intestines, who knew where it could be now. Dead was easy, had always seemed easier than living, if you want to know the simplest truth of my life. Not the mad pull from hell they talked about in Sunday school, or with a pale circle of family around me. And it didn't matter as I held my own hand through the dim mansion of my head. There are mirrors everywhere leading me to the end, and they alone wanted me. Even the floor was my mirror, singing into me from underground. Now I'm wanting to read a poem. Oh, here it is. So I'm just gonna read a couple more. They're both newer poems. I don't know if they're gonna go with this manuscript or not. This one I wrote at the very beginning of COVID. How lonely sat the town. Quarry houses like napping men flanked us. We were born on the day of other births, many other births. Inside the train tracks were the sounds of sleep, and within the miniature of a single word was our story. You were my widow. You paced many nights while I slept and placed in me the sad horses of night. Grass creaked as it grew. Summer afternoons were many miles long, and we twisted in and out of each other like humans moving in and out of their lungs or shame. Some days we woke up already dead. Then the birds lifted our prone bodies and carried us above the gray houses, the empty crumbs of people, a mute strip mall too stricken to look up to see us. When the birds tired, still we floated, the space in us having learned to become its own sky, our own gravities shattered, our bodies filled with approaching dawns. When we died for good, we went back into our separate seas, and the spaces we had spent our lives opening became another town so far away, we never made it there. All right, so I'm just gonna read one more poem. I actually just, I don't know if anyone else has ever had this experience. I wrote this poem, I don't know, maybe like 8 months ago. And I had no memory of writing it at all. And I am recovering from like a very severe depression. So I haven't been writing or thinking about writing for a really long time, but it was very strange to find this poem and not have any memory of it. And it's about a friary, a Franciscan friary that was in the village where my husband and I lived in Hillfield, England. And it was weird because right when I found this poem, I had just had a dream about this place. It was very strange to find the poem. And it's called St. Francis. We began days trying to feel that we had a body, then going back and forth between bodies. Each day decided if today was a day for fur or a day for frozen air. Down the road was a friary where friars lived, some in long brown robes and some in donated jeans. St. Francis stood near a sheep field, covered in different kinds of poop and rain. I met another American there, but she didn't want to talk about being American. She gave me a plastic cup of white wine, which surprised me. I didn't know the monks drank. Friars, she said. There was a small house on the property where they kept the newly dead. Brother Giles died, and I knew he was in the little house. Different friars would take turns sitting in there with him. The sun sparkled there rarely over an apple tree and turned the stained glass into candy-colored lozenges. Dirty sheep sniffed it and brayed into a gray body of afternoon. Afternoons lasted a very long time. A large animal that we lived inside, our planet. It stirred things, kicked them up, destroyed property. But there was love there. That's what I forgot. The animal was love. Inside it, we were planets. That's it. Thank you.
Wow, that was great, Julie. The lozenge of love in Larkin. Right? Carnival of Souls is such a horrifying movie. My God, I can't wait to read that book. Peter Campion is the author of 4 books of poetry and writes wonderfully about poetry, and he teaches at the University of Minnesota. His new book, I get to hold up this one Summer Evening at the Waterfall, deals with divorce and how it ripples backwards and sideways in time. Sometimes when I read Peter's work, I think of the way media and a sense of immensity of numbers of people impinges on a transformer of privacy, and how Transformer treats the largeness of numbers of people as he does in a way the other big engulfing spaces we've known, landscapes, the weather, measurable distances, silence, music. Peter indicates this rueful immensity too, with an airport or the appearance of countryside on a map, public places to be traversed to reach homes, porches, rooms, people passing on their ways home, wherever that is or can be for now. One of the things that Peter does is he gets at the very essence of a situation through atmosphere achieved without an excessive wash of signifiers, what the poem presents. For instance, I remember my childhood friends of divorce and rooms lit by bowls of Applejack cereal and television sitcoms at night, and my friends having more intense awareness of their divorced parents as other people, somehow not necessarily troubling, but troubled and sometimes more adult or intense. And the only reason I do are Peter's memory poems here. The animating struggle of poetry that responds to one's life is the need to say what feels right. The animating struggle of poetry that responds to one's actual life is the need to say what feels right, whether you are a naturalist or Baroque. I found out about Peter Campion, about how good he is, from my friend Tom Ewell, who is here, who is similar to Peter in some ways, and some other poets, also Phoenix poets, some of them. And I think of them as forming a line in some ways jarred and inspired by the example of David Ferry in reading their lives with classics and contemporaries and reading with their lives in the moment of disparity and in the moment of concord, and the idea that what you read should be directly involved in the way you actually live seems to me a very Massachusetts, very Boston notion, an available one, almost an inescapable one. So Peter, thank you so much for your new work and for being here today.
Oh, thank you, David. That's such a generous introduction. And thanks to everybody, and especially to the other readers. It's really a pleasure to read with 3 poets whose work I admire so much. I'll start with a poem called Chorus. It's about waking up in the morning. Chorus. Before they register as cars, trucks, planes, the steel containers streaming through at 5 are lines of force in a green-black industrial dream corridor. And language also, whipping round as if on winds from outer space, some Thrasher magazine ad copy, or Wordsworth's city now doth like a garment wear, boomerangs past with blips of family on the line are who's divorced and who's in prison, and he was the, who was the, she was. Here's the nightmare I want no one to shake me from. I run through subway station tunnels, following trails of sentences sliced off by walls, until in this palatial and vacant hotel, the PA booms the splutters and rasps of accusation. You chose to walk on wire. You tailored your slender hell, leaving my jaw all bitten down, all clenched in anger, even as Jack and Lizzie rustle in their rooms and the sun comes. God, like Julie Andrews in The Flowers, the hills are alive this morning. Sparrows sing from our gutters. So, David mentioned a certain kind of, I suppose, a certain kind of generational section of American memory. And so you can blame him for this poem. This is called Ice Cream. Ice cream. I never wet my lips in that horse spring Hippocrene. I don't remember drowsing, cradled by the twin peaks of Parnassus, to awake, surprise, a poet. Those are the first 3 lines of the satires of Perseus. But reading them today, I pictured someone else. Her name was Martha, and she ran the ice cream parlor over our subway station. Maybe my memory varnishes, but the neighborhood felt easier then. More trees, less everyone all streamlined like The Hunted. Summer of weed smoke from porches, fingers through chain link. And Martha, at the frosted dipping cabinet she keeps between herself and us 3 high school boys, after the parlor closes, doesn't flirt so much as spin us to marionettes in her outlandish tease. Oh yeah? You think you boys are big? You think you can? And one time, I've had, no joke, 10,000 men. Taut, sunburned cheek beneath her squint. What melted me to dribbled puddles back then was dirty talk. Attack Perseus also takes, bracing some bozo from the reign of Nero. You never had one fellow from behind, another running his hands all over you, and his tongue, this long one, like some Apulian hound's. But now the crude, much like the delicate, obscures. Bring me down in the thick of it, the actual chill from the canted glass, somebody's triumph muffler growling outside as Martha flicks a strand of gray fallen across her eyes. I know I half invent this. Memory grants distance. Distance seems control. And soon the neighborhood will turn out slick as a website. No hippie shops with dangling spider plants. No Martha. But there, beyond what I could want or even know to ask for, as the darkness gathers, all her talk of fucking and getting fucked distills to just its tone of gusto, edged with a sweet corrective sting. The heights of Helicon and limpid Corinthian streams I leave to men on pedestals, their ivy garlands lapping themselves. I come here as a semi-pagan, smuggling my songs to the altar edge of poetry. Who makes the magpies, when they're near us, try to speak? Who taught that parrot how to squawk, "Hey there," in Greek? It was the master of all arts, ingenious maker of bodies, maestro of forbidden noises, belly. Just let the slightest chance of a salary gleam, and grackle poets flap their beaks so much you'd guess they were gobbling nectar saved for Pegasus. Thanks. Well, since that salacious poem seemed to go over well, I'll read a somewhat negative self-portrait. I'm working on the positive ones. This is my only poem with a title in French. Promise you it's the only one. Le Chien. The on and u of French your parents spoke to hide their meanings from you. How enchanting those syllables once were. Blue waves of leaves on a locked gate, and you, the spaniel, panting to be let in. And even then, their words melted to air, their dreamed up Europe blurred to a station wagon. Night, New Hampshire, ick and stick of squirming on the Naugahyde. And even now, as trusted, grumbling guard of family and home, should any one glimmer of close, warm creature stir the urge, possessed by your desire to possess, you chew and chew. You chew to barest matter, and lost in chewing, chew to nothingness. You bite your way inside your fleur, your fleuve. You dog, you sink your muzzle in, you gorge. I think I'll read just two more poems. This is one of the two title poems from this book, One Summer Evening at the Falls. There's a really cool waterfall in Minneapolis that feeds into the Mississippi, and it's just a really cool place where nature and the city come together. And I kind of sliced and diced images from it into poems. One summer evening at the falls. We were just strangers, crowding the fence to watch the falls keep falling. Bodies jostled and shifted, raised their phones over their heads for pictures. Summer making me feel the city night lay open, mansions down the bluffs and glassed-in plazas and paths by the river branched together, storylines implicit in the places all those people were coming from and going. Needing to write it down for you tonight, though. Just her voice comes back. Slender, punk lady, neck tattoo, a meteoric burst. She edges only an instant into view, scolding her boyfriend for all to hear. I know you care. That's not enough. I chanted to myself tonight. We're kissing through screen doors again, and all I want to show you's this day after day, making a life, bodega, bus stop, laundromat, public garden with pergola where you took my kids when you lived here, azalea branches in our sink. And oh, thank you. I'll read one more poem. This poem is called Years. It doesn't take that long though. I have another one called Days. It's just a kind of obsession. Right. Years. We were in San Francisco, then France, then broke in Boston, then Maryland, where men in orange vests were shooting skeet on fields of stubbled snow. Then I was in Korea, then returning, Minnesota, then Rome, and she was back in Berkeley. The kids were there with us, and they were growing. Always, it felt like we were on a train, and time, its invisible rivers, kept on flowing. The conversation stopped at different stops as others left or boarded, and freight cars passed with ornate graffiti gemmed like comet spatter. Like those spikes and swirls, the poems and thinking and emotions seemed so often like a need to punch beyond the surface. But the surface bends to fit your fist, the way you don't invent the words you speak, but grow inside your mother language. We were in Rome, then I was in Ohio, then returning. Others were at the table while the train careened through sideways snow. Elsewhere, our friend was dying. Elsewhere, a war went on. Our table on the train was loud with talk that sometimes felt like mere evasion, like a need to say mere like and not the thing itself. But this was all there was. We were advancing, and time, its invisible rivers, kept on flowing. Dishes were clattering, faces were going, then returning. Wires and terracotta roofs and shattered warehouse glass, then cliffs went past. People walked up and down the rushing aisles. Always beneath our feet there was a tremor. It felt sometimes like helpless plummeting through empty space. Sometimes the losing, then regaining balance looked like dancing. Thank you. Such a pleasure to read with such a group.
Thank you, Peter. Peter, I think that's the first time I ever heard you read, which is kind of amazing. Oh no, I heard you read at the Blacksmith House. That was a great reading too. Oh, my. July is Kathleen Ossip's fourth book of poetry. A cosmopolitan poet with a feeling for the hyper-realism of dailiness and who makes poems that have big scope. She teaches at the New School in Manhattan and lives north of the city, one of those places on the Hudson, I believe. I wish I had my copy of July with me. It's a beautiful book with a bright yellow cover. Maybe the best book of the year, if people are really paying attention. A great one in a year like every other year with a lot of great books. It's on my desk at work because I'll be teaching it soon. If you call a book July, I think you're talking about keeping a possible celebration in mind, one that we should have had already and one we still can have. I think that is one of the most surprising things about the book, which I read and enjoyed in the same night, one night, read the whole book, though it's not a small book at all. July is one of the best and fullest answers to the misogyny and racism festival of the Trump administration and the Trump election. Whereas the Trump years were, hopefully we can say were, largely about fronting and brazen lies, July's is about telling the truth, and not in a simple way, but a large and generous way that judges what is true while registering the world of others. There are a lot of different aspects of the book. On one level, it's about growing up in a toxic culture as a person and as a writer, but not entirely so. And we get poems that show how wonderful and various Ossip is in her craft. Then there's a beautiful and documentary style middle section about a cross-country trip she took with her college-bound daughter during the disastrous summer of the 2016 election that somebody should turn into a movie. The last section of the book is a visionary sequence that proposes we let a goddess run things, a goddess who exemplifies the honesty, live responses an ability to see reality and possibility that Ossip shows in every one of her poems. So Kathleen, I'm really looking forward to hearing you read.
Oh my goodness. David, not only are you a wonderful poet, but I believe you give the best introductions in the business. I really defy anyone to do a reading hosted by David and not leave a little bit happier with themselves. So thank you, David, for that and for inviting me to read. And thank you to Mark, Jonathan, and Cassandra. For this reading series, I was an audience member at the previous edition 2 weeks ago, and I said, this is one of the best Zoom readings I've been on in our era of Zoom readings. And also to my fellow readers, thank you very much. I feel like Hannah, Julia, and Peter, I feel like there should be a word for the kind of relationship that happens between people who didn't previously know each other, but then end up reading together. And I'm always struck by how much the work is in conversation with each other. So I am going to read from July, and I'm going to read one individual poem, like standalone poem, and then I'm going to read from the section that David mentioned called July, which is about the road trip. But this individual poem I'll read first, and it's the impulse for it came out of that experience, which I think we've probably all had, where you can't think of the right response to someone who says something kind of stupefying to you at the time in the moment, but then I had the good fortune to be able to write this poem to the person who stupefied me. And the situation is detailed in the title, which is "To the poet who after my reading said, your poems are good, eccentric but good." And so you can see my dilemma at the time. And I'm going to slip one short sentence of French in, which is "c'est chaud," which probably a lot of you know just means that's hot, isn't it? And then the Emily Dickinson makes a cameo appearance, and a lot of you probably know, but when she couldn't decide on a single word in one of her drafts, she would put a little cross next to the word, and then she'd give alternates to the word, sort of, so she could have her cake and eat it too. And that's referenced in the poem. So I think that's it. That's all the preamble. To the poet who after my reading said, your poems are good, eccentric but good. Imagine that you, at 18, in Paris for the first time with all your loving ideals about penises intact, in your new mini trench coat and smelling the smell of garlic and unfiltered smoke and a salted coffee, were approached from behind. Imagine un Français, bald, smooth, spectacled, grabbing your right hand and pressing it to his yes, soft, yes, exposed penis, and hissed, "C'est chaud, hein?" as he kept walking past you, shaking with his poor French demented laughs. Would you say trauma? It wasn't. Would you think poem fodder? Would you bring to bear your rhetoric textbook and wall of metaphors built up from yes, stone, yes, sky, yes, Shakespeare? You, no, not arrogant, mentioned your encroaching baldness, which I said that I, yes, liked. You were not spectacled nor smooth, but I admire, I think, smoothness. You didn't want to say bad, you couldn't commit to good. Smoothly the current does not run, smoothness can never shock. When electricity veins through the sky, is that really its best, its crispest manifestation? Must Emily Dickinson ride through the yes, cloud dark sky on a flashing bolt, screaming, all men say what to me? hands tattooed with the small crosses that meant she couldn't choose/settle on an ideal word. Abandoned possibility fairer than prose for a what word? Imagine the same hot lightning snaking up your rectum. That was childbirth, 14 hours hard work. And my husband's smell and my cow moans and the doula's watered down grape juice helped. I couldn't call it pain, no, orgasm, no, earthquake closer, but no. But I wanted so to call it something. This is the merry disease we share. I suspected that the Queen's English and I would not run smoothly then. So I wept, past imagining. Is it possible that death will be a yes? Immortality, not a marble stone, but a what? Maxi pad? A silver perfume? There is no yes true metaphor, each eccentric as the others. When I dab my wrists and neck with the oily roller ball of my favorite perfume essence, Rain by Terra Nova, a bargain at yes, less than $20 for 0.3 ounce notes of lily of the valley, clover, and musk. I do it because it smells fresh, like a new earth. Imagine that same lightning struck you down on the new earth dead. You'd say critical judgment, I'd say poor social skills. Imagine instead the lightning struck the earth and a laurel bloomed where once stood only tombstones. I know it's hard to be a man with an ideal between your legs and nothing but Shakespeare's cold lightning waiting for you on Judgment Day. Let's wait together. We open our hearts and dictionaries. You were waiting, weren't you, for me to say, gee, thanks, and are still what? Yes, no, waiting. So, oh, thanks. So thank you. So this road trip I took was with my daughter who was off to college in July of 2016. And we decided that we were going to drive from the northernmost part of the continental United States to the southernmost part. And that meant we started in Minnesota. And in order to get to the northernmost part of Minnesota, you have to drive a little bit through Canada. And that's when I'll start. This is a diary poem. I've always loved diary poems, and this was my stab at one. So each little section starts with the date in July and the place where we were. July 11th, Bemidji to Angle Inlet to Roseau, Minnesota. To get to Angle Inlet, the true northernmost part of our journey, we drive through woods coniferous, mostly sky. We have to cross into Canada for about 4 miles, then cross back into the US. The smiling white Canadian border agent. Hello, ladies. What brings you to Canada today? We outline our quixotic purpose. Okay, gals, have a great time. He explains that we have to call into US Customs when we get to Jim's Corner, then proceed to Angle Inlet, then call into Canadian Customs on our return. We're the only 2 nations in the world that allow customs by phone. US and Mexico don't do that, he says proudly. Jim's Corner. I'd pictured a sort of general store where the call to customs would be made homespun by donuts and interesting hardware, and Jim. Instead, a muddy corner lot with a rotary phone handset. When we get out of the car, we're targeted by flying insects as conscious as birds. On our way, we'd seen birds like ravens who'd been working out at the gym. Angle Inlet, a flock of white pelicans loiter wearily in the water near the shore. A caretaker, a white man, drives up in a truck and throws some fish. Immediate frenzy, displays of aggression, slapping wings, expansion of their sullen mouth pouches. The drawing of a pelican in my mother's prayer book, pricking her own breast with her long pointed beak so that her starving babies could drink her blood, a symbol of Jesus who shed his blood to save us, and oh, the maternal martyrdom. OED app tells me John Skelton wrote, "Then said the pelican, when my birds be slain, with my blood I them revive. Scripture doth record, the same did our Lord, and rose from death to life. We're staying the night in Roseau. Don't tread on me, flag. Husky trotting alongside of road. Oh well, can't see everything. Cleansing wave, gospel church. Jesus really loves us. I'd rather be a conservative nut job than a liberal with no nuts and no job." Bumper sticker on Pelican Feeder's truck. July 13th, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She always frays when she gets too hungry, and we ate a late small breakfast and skipped lunch. By 5 o'clock, she was frantic and too hungry to eat, and she wouldn't say yes to the Falls Overlook Cafe, although we were right there. She found on her phone an expensive restaurant downtown. I lost it and shouted that it'd be a half hour before we got there, sat down, ordered, and got food there. Shame. She'd been nursing like a champ, said the doula, from her first moments in the world. When they turned out the lights in my room, I allowed a nurse to take her to the nursery. Baby kennel, Rob said. An hour later, the nurse came back and woke me up. "Your baby's crying. Do you want to feed her?" "No, give her a bottle." The sun had been in my eyes all day, stinging them even behind sunglasses, along with the melting sunscreen. And by 8 o'clock, it was still aggressive as noon. I felt attacked, wanted to attack the nearest vulnerable thing. Guns, gold, and rock and roll. A Corvette convention in town. The downtown streets closed off and lined with Corvettes. The owners strolled past and sat at outdoor tables drinking beer, the guys, and wine, the wives. They're mostly in their 60s, white, prosperous looking in an unpleasant way. Prosperity that has abdicated responsibility. Smug was my interpretation. Their phallic substitutes looked cute and slightly threatening, as if they might spurt any minute. Still, I wouldn't mind a ride in a Corvette. Enjoyed the highest speed limit so far today, 80 miles per hour. I pushed to 90. The distance is so distant and the road there so flat and foreshortened. We saw colts, but Murray called them ponies. Didn't I teach her the difference when she was 7? What else haven't I taught her? In Falls Park, we watched a mother duck and a duckling get what seemed to us too close to the edge of the falls. The water rushed furiously around them, and it seemed impossible that the duckling wouldn't be swept over. The mother was unconcerned, turning away from the duckling, often diving into the water for plants or fish. The baby was so tiny, but held its own and made its way into a little hollow in the rocks, and the mother followed. We moved to sit in the cool grass in the shade of an evergreen with long, lethal needles. Then a police car drove into the parking lot not far from where we were sitting. Murray clutched my hand. One of them's getting out his gun. I couldn't see, sun in eyes, and I couldn't honestly tell her the fear was irrational. Where are they going? They're talking to a man who's sitting on the path. He's naked. Let's go. So I think the next and last piece I'm going to read is, it's set in Branson, Missouri. And I don't know if anyone's ever been to Branson, Missouri or knows about it, but it's kind of like a Midwestern country music themed Las Vegas. And so that's where this piece takes place. And I should say that scattered throughout this long poem are kind of standalone poems, and this piece of the diary has a standalone poem with its own title in it. July 16th, Branson, Missouri. I wake up to Rob's salty smell and the fucking sun. Replica of Empire State Building topped by King Kong. At first, I think it's the World Trade Center tower with its plume of smoke. Replica of Titanic. We're each given a passenger's name and have to wait until the end of the tour to find out whether we survive. I survive. Murray survives. Rob, as a male crew member, doesn't survive. Toy museum, quotes from Bible on walls, BB gun annex, segregated cabinets with Sambo and Aunt Jemima dolls, careless piles, dusty board games, unloved dolls. What I thought I had learned about towns: where there is money, towns are pleasant, and where there is no money, towns are unpleasant. But there has to be a quietness too. We play mini golf, our family sport, at Pirates Cove. Mini golf. The object of the game is to be a family sport. The object of a family is to self-destruct. Mini golf, like a family, creates its own artificial worlds. Mini golf, like a family, trades in myths and legends. In both, there are markers of individuality, club heights, ball colors, contradiction, rebellion, separation. Both are at their most intense in summer. Money troubles tend to disrupt each. The mini golf boom of the early 20th century came to an end during the economic depression in the late 1930s. Mini golf and families are for those who wish the past different. Mini golf was invented in the United States, as was my family. The object of the United States is to self-destruct. Can I prevent it with my pink putter and orange ball, driving into the artificial sand trap, or farther, far into the myth of the unblemished, bloody summer? Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's great.
Thank you.
Now here's Cassandra.
Is it open mic time? Mark, I think, do you usually come in with a little quip, or do we go straight to Jonathan and open mic?
I think we first have to tell everybody what's happening shortly. Next week we have a full-length open mic, and we're talking, something like 20 poems to be read in memory of Paul E. Sexton III, a poet who just recently passed away early. On the October 16th, we have the Poetry on the Move Festival, which spotlights Canberra, including the poets Kimberly Williams, Jen Webb, Paul Munden, Shane Strange, Gemma Nethercote Way, and Paul Hetherington. And I'll just give you one more after that, which is the next Saturday. So we're going strong for a while here. We have Mervyn Taylor, Sarah Cahill Maron, Jennifer Rathburn, and Indran Amathiagan. But of course, first and foremost, I should thank David for putting together this amazing group of poets: Hannah Sullivan, Kathleen Ossip, Story and Peter Campion. And yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and joining us at Lit Balm. And now I will pass over the open mic to Jonathan and Cassandra.
Thank you, Mark. I guess it's my turn this week. Cassandra's nodding and giving me thumbs up. All right.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Okay. So David has assembled our open mic readers tonight who are going to read one poem each. And I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves because trolls do not wait patiently this long for a chance to scream obscenities. So we should be okay for now. Al Ledford, is Al Ledford here?
It's Russell, but yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, that's available from Vegetarian Alcoholic Press. It is Children of the Anxious City, but I'm gonna be reading from the second book that I have coming out, which is in November with also Vegetarian Alcoholic Press. It's called Looking Glass House, and this is the pseudo titular poem called The Thing About Shapes in Looking Glass House. This orangutan shot me full of lasers in the mirror this morning with its red-brown eyes, combed its sparse hair back, and made kissy mug faces at me like it knew I had something inside me that wanted to smash glass with my fists. It drew lipstick rings on the wrong part of its own face and cackled hysterically, clapping its hands. Then I turned away like I got an eyelash in my eye, wouldn't stop tearing. And I turned back and my face also returned, and the ape was no longer in the glass. It wasn't a window anymore, but I'm still waiting. Thanks.
Thank you. And you're Al Russell?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Al. Thank you. And Jace, I guess you're reading next?
Oh God, I muted myself for no reason. Hey, I'm Jace. I just wanted to pep Outlook Springs, UNH alum magazine put together several issues in. We published David Blair. Y'all are fantastic. This poem is forthcoming in, I want to say, the next issue of Louisiana Literature. It's called The Letter E in Swamp. Neither could these flowers grow anywhere but latched to rocks, kaleidoscope, meteor, flare, buckshot, and ricochet, or the swamp return the dead, at least no sooner than responses posed to the letters I have am cramming, into a mailbox now unaffiliated, overflowing beneath the star-dusted, drunken sky, petals that drift dark waters that rot against roots. Today, I wrote, I've never stopped counting. Every second is the longest night of the year. 117,329,211, 212, 213. But even still, like a waiter not yet grown impatient, humoring all our mortal sins, the alligator carries the moon across its serrated back.
Thank you, Jace. Where's Louisiana Literature headquartered? Do you know?
Beyond Louisiana, I have absolutely no idea.
All right, good deal.
Outlook Springs is a great magazine. Definitely.
Alco edits it.
All right, next up, we're going to hear from Sam DeFlitch. Sam, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. And David, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really wonderful to be here and lovely to see you again. So I'm just going to be reading one very short poem out of Confluence, which came out earlier this year. It's called To Lead a Pig Skyward. I read a pig can't look up, that you've got to gently tilt their heads back if they're going to take in the night skies. I never led a pig skyward late at night in Pennsylvania. Earthbound is probably better. We all start getting ideas when we look up, and the pigs, they always seemed so pleased where they were, rooting in soft earth. No need to look up for God when the holy was there beneath their trotters, cool below the autumn archer that was rising lightly on the eastern horizon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sam.
Great poem, Sam.
Thanks, David.
All right, next up, we're going to hear from Lily Greenberg. Lily?
Hi, thanks, David, for inviting me to be here and to all the writers reading. I do have a book forthcoming with Broadstone Books, but I'm going to read a new poem that was published today, actually in About Place Journal. And a little context, I wrote the poem this year during Pride Month, a month I do not particularly like for the ways in which it invites people to commodify identity. And it has one reference to the botanist Robin Wall Kimmerer's invention of the pronoun ki, K-I, for non-human life. The poem is called Who and begins with an epigraph. We don't need a worldview of earth beings as objects anymore. That thinking has led us to the precipice of climate chaos and mass extinction. We need a new language that reflects the life-affirming world we want, a new language with its roots in an ancient way of thinking. Robin Wall Kimmerer. Here I am, it's June, loose, multiple, earth-toned getup, but all around me glitter, drawn eyebrows, deep V, and I hate it. Costume, I don't know how to do it, and I'm more empty when the world blows through mine. 30 days of thinking about the failure of language, to split myself into two, bifocal, making whole multiple objects of attention. Am I writing if I'm online shopping? Am I still interested in women if I am dating a man? Back to thinking about the failure of language, bi-radical, independent and odd, quarry full of red lichen, no, sundew, little mouths look like leaves, a fly dead in the nectar. Are you a plant if you eat meat? If you bend to sun like everyone else and also eat meat? Taker, who let you open the biorhythm? Who let you be so multiple? Binomial, me too. I'm at once several names. Lou, Loon, Crontigue, touch me not. Soon, Aster, risen woman taking off her clothes. Risen person taking off their clothes. What was worn? Fishnets onto water, breaking the moon into snakes. Flickers running the direction of a way strewn to black. Naked, what am I called? Kimmerer says key. This maple in spring, key gives us rock gone sugar. Key snapping turtle in the road. Lift. Key opens at mouth, the whole body. Key will close on you. Open, what am I called? In the oldest beach, Key carves a name. Key is walking the long dog home. All doors open to Key. Shadows sit with Key. Hear my name and say, who? Who heard God and multiplied? Who is a womb? Who bloomed bitter flowers in the sewer? Whose night is made of walnuts? Who is dark matter? Who found their name in a plastic calculator? A heart finally swings open. Whose? Hear my names and say open. Who is open as an arch in a garden, peas climbing spine up? Who sweats openly on the brown grass? Who turned the water off? Who is asking, who asked for this? Who is open enough to know the miracle of a bee resting on a shoulder? Who belongs to Key? Who unlocks the ocean? Whose song is singing up the sun? Lord, open the eyes of my name and let me hear. Thanks.
Fascinating. Thank you. And we're going to close out with Bob Heeman. Bob, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hold on, let me get the poem.
Alrighty.
Information. Never learned how the gun worked, how the rain worked, how the hamster worked. Never learned if folding the map would change the course of the river, or whether opening the door would change the shape of the room. Never understood how the words would be different if the woman spoke them, how the horizon would change if they tried to reach it. Never understood how the words chosen would change what was described. Thank you.
Very cool. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks.
All right, that's it for tonight. Don't forget, next Saturday is our full-length open mic in honor of Paul Lee Sexton III. So please, if you'd care to participate in that open mic, drop us a line on Facebook, facebook.com/litbalm. Write to us at info@litbalm.org. And yeah, let us know. We'll be looking to hear a poem each from all kinds of people. Okay, Mark, Cassandra?
Yeah, well, once again, thanks so much to David Blair and the assembled, including Hannah, Kathleen, Julia, and Peter. Very much appreciated. Cassandra, do you want to tell us anything about the Poetry on the Move Festival? from Canberra?
Poetry on the Move is a fantastic Australian festival, one of the finest that's dedicated to poetry and has lovely crowds of people, both poets and the broader community in Canberra. It has had to split itself into 2 sections and go online for some of the events, and next year there will be some in-person events, but the pandemic is has crushed our spirits a little bit here in Australia lately with lockdowns. So we've had to postpone some of the live events, but it's pretty exciting to pair with Lit Balm. So 2 of my favorite things, Lit Balm and Poetry on the Move. If only we had David Blair to do all the introductions because he's so wonderful at that.
And on that note, I'm going to close out with a poem from Nazim Hikmet, Turkish poet. And this poem's called The Optimist. As a kid, he didn't pluck the wings off flies, tie tin cans to cats' tails, lock beetles in matchboxes, or stomp anthills. No, he grew up and all those things were done to him. I sat at his deathbed. He said to read him a poem about the sun and the sea, nuclear reactors and satellites, about the greatness of humanity. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful, wonderful night. Namaste and love and poetry to all. And well, we'll see you next weekend, I hope.
Good to see everyone. Yeah.
Thank you, David, again.
Congratulations on your new books, Sam and Lily, Al, and the fabulous poem, Jace. Thank you, Kathleen. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Fantastic event. Amazing.
I thought it was good. Thank you.